Welcome to the Biz Buzz Podcast, where we're talking business. This is a SCORE podcast and go-to resource for entrepreneurs and businesses at every stage. From dreamers and startups to seasoned pros and Fortune 500s. If you're launching, growing, or just thinking about your next big idea, you're in the right place. Each episode, we bring you expert insights, practical tools, and the inspiration you need to take your business to the next level. This is the Biz Buzz Podcast, brought to you by the Greater Milwaukee Chamber of Commerce and powered by SCORE of Southeast Wisconsin. Now, here's your host and SCORE mentor, Jim Rossetti.
Yes, and thanks for joining us today. We're so glad to have you. And before we start the show today, or the podcast today, I want to mention our new sponsor that just joined us called Veritas Financial Services. And just briefly, Veritas believes that financial success goes beyond just numbers. It starts with identifying your true purpose in life and understanding how money supports that journey. Visit veritasinvesting.com today. Okay, and if you've been listening to our series, we've been interviewing SCORE mentors and finding out a little bit about their background, finding out a little bit about them. And today I'm introducing one of our mentors. He has been with us. I think he's been with the SCORE chapter at least for a couple of years now, but very interesting gentleman, a very interesting background. I'm going to let him talk and tell you more about that. Lew Bartfield. Lew, welcome to the BizBuzz.
Well, thank you for having me. Nice to see you, Jim.
Yeah, I'm just so glad you could join us today, Lew. Now, listen, you've been on board, you say, about 2 years with SCORE?
Joined SCORE about 2 years ago and knew about SCORE for probably, it's been around for many, many years, but knew about it, had a friend tell me a little bit about it and thought it'd be something, we've all had mentors in our life and thought it may be fine to, be the person that plays it forward. The time to do that. So, joined and it's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to find, what prompted you to, and I ask all our volunteers this as we do these interviews, what prompted you to want to step up and do volunteer work like this? No payment involved, and share your knowledge and your experience with probably a lot of startup businesses.
Sure. Well, probably two reasons. First, in my life, I've had mentors from all different walks of life, coworkers, relatives, friends, people you meet along the way who have mentored me and offered advice and cared about me. And I've found it very valuable in large part and small part, and so forth. So I really respected what those mentors did. And here's an organization, SCORE, that plays that forward. That a lot of us, we're not all retired, but some of us are. I am. And so I felt like, hey, let me try this out and help others maybe a little bit, or give them a gem or two of information that'll help them be successful and in their journey towards owning their own business or enhancing the business they already have. So that was my first reason. The second one was I've worked in what we call the volunteer industry my whole career in the nonprofit. So we depend on volunteers to be on our board of directors, to be on the ground, to do from stuffing envelopes to leading and setting strategy. So volunteering is needed. And I hope everybody in life, you get a lot of satisfaction is the bottom line, yeah. Jim. It really, it kind of is the fuel for the blood. It really makes you feel jazzed that you're satisfied, you're helping somebody else, they appreciate it, you feel appreciated, and you gave some valuable assistance to someone as they working on a new business or helping them go to the next level of an existing business.
Yeah, if you can add value to somebody's life, I feel good about that, and I think you do. And that's what I'm hearing from most of the SCORE mentors I talk to, is they just love doing it and helping out other people. So
yeah, right.
So now that you've been mentoring your area of expertise, and you've helped me out as a co-mentor with some of my clients, and I can't thank you enough, and they can't thank you enough because you did a
Thank
great
you.
job
Well,
helping.
yeah.
But your area of expertise, one of them has been helping people set up a nonprofit organization, or NGO, I think they call it, or a 501c3.
Right.
And where does that experience come from, Lou?
Yeah, well, this may sound a little funny, but I call myself a body parts guy. And what I mean by that is I work for three national health associations, the American Heart Association. Then went from the heart to the pancreas to the American Diabetes Association, and then from the pancreas to the lungs to the American Lung Association. Been
Okay.
on the mission side, been on the fundraising side, and wound up being the CEO of the American Lung Association for the Midwest. So, this, to some degree, not-for-profit work. I consider myself a jack of all trades and perhaps a master of some, but so I'm a general manager, so to speak. So from planning and budgeting and staff management and fundraising, which is similar to sales, all of the components, marketing and strategic planning and customer development, acquisition, retention. I'm just throwing a lot of the chunks out there that we dealt with, but we did it building a mission driven organization. And candidly, the only thing that's really different between not for profit and for profit is really that the money goes back into mission. There's not any shareholders. Okay, so most of the principles of being successful in business apply to both not for profit and for profit. But I have been in the not for profit world, fighting for, healthy hearts and not getting rid of diabetes, and then healthy lungs and clean air, and, and all the different things like lung cancer and asthma, COPD that affect your lungs. So, been really a good ride, an enjoyable, career.
Yeah, and along with, but I mean, you understand the process of setting it up. I think the biggest thing that people run into when they try to set up a nonprofit organization is there are some hurdles that you got to jump, and some bylaws and things like that you got to deal with. And when people see the process, they stand back a little bit and go, "Whoa, I didn't."
Yeah.
What do you encounter when you present that to people?
Well, I think I have both for-profit and not-for-profit clients in SCORE, but anytime you have to deal with government or the legalities of setting up a company, especially a nonprofit, it is a little more cumbersome. You get kind of that eye look like, really? I got to what are our what are articles of incorporation or bylaws or those types of things. So you get
Yeah.
that first initial glare, like, can I pay somebody to do this for me? And you can. There are a lot of
Hmm.
companies out there that said, "Hey, give me $1,500, give me $5,000, and I'll do the I'll just ask you the questions and I'll fill out the application." But I think
Right.
when you get into it, you have that choice, but it's really not. You have to supply the information, whether you put it into the online application or you pay somebody else to put it in. It's the same drill. So it's really not that heavy a lift, but there it is. You do have to do some thinking and get a
Hmm.
a yellow pad or a computer screen and write down some thoughts and start to craft out a dream and turn the dream into a real business. Whether in my case it would be a not-for-profit business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're getting a status too. They're getting where they're not going to be taxed like a for-profit business, and to get that, they've got to jump through some hoops and so forth, and because people can use it to set up a business where they really their mission is not at all what they're saying it is, and so don't you need a board of directors too that you need to assemble
Yeah.
as you set that up? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and I can also share maybe a high level of the process after. I'll answer about the board of directors, but if you want some more information about, what do they have to do to start up, from scratch a nonprofit, I'll share with you as well. But the board of directors, in a for-profit, if you're an LLC, you don't need a board of directors. As you become an S corp and different structures, you sometimes need a board of directors. But in a not for profit, the owner of the organization are a group of volunteers called the board of directors. They're technically what they call fiduciary, which means the legal responsible body that if you're the executive director, they technically hire and fire you. Hopefully they just hire you and never fire. I've had that blessing. But so that board of directors now, they don't run day to day. You as the leader, as the paid staff person, or even sometimes you're a volunteer, lead person in the form of an executive director. You lead the operations, day to day operations. The board is there for that legal aspect, for that fiduciary, they're the oversight of finance. You have a chair of a finance committee that looks at the books. They work with your auditors if you're doing an audit. Usually, if you're over a certain threshold, about $50,000, you need to have a treasurer. They help you develop your strategic plan and your tactical plan. They approve your annual budget. If you want to hire staff, they approve the positions that you want to add. If you're a solo person and you want to add one, or if you have three and you want to add two positions, they look at the finance side and they talk and discuss and they do that approval. They may get involved as individuals on a committee or on some projects, but that's really their duty is fiduciary, long-range planning, and oversight the board. Do you want me now a time just to chat about a little bit of the process just to get started, or maybe you want that later in the program?
Well, you can do that because I think there's people listening that may aspire to want to be a nonprofit,
right?
And they really don't know where to start. That's kind of such a hurdle for them to jump,
right?
And that's where you've been so helpful, coming in, and they come to SCORE for your expertise in that area.
Yeah.
So you can share that if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. No, so you're right. What you said is right. They have an idea. They have a passion to help people, whether it's older adults, younger children, a certain subsect of the population, or the general. It could be health, it could be education. Whatever that mission, or value or idea they have. And sometimes it's a dream. I have a thought, I have an idea. How do I organize it? How do I get started? The formalizing it, and I think you said it well before, that protects you as a corporation and not your personal assets, that legalizes and that you can get tax deductible money. You have to then formalize your organization. And there are two steps. The first step is to go to the state you live in, and I'll just use Wisconsin, since I'm from Wisconsin. You go to the Secretary of State, and what you want to apply for is two things, really. You want to get what's called an EIN, which is an identifying number, like a Social Security number for an individual. Right. It's a number that gives your business, some formality. And you have to apply to the Secretary of State's office for what's called a non-stock corporation, And you have to provide some materials. You fill out some forms. You'll tell them what's the mission and why. What is the purpose of this organization? They may ask you probably another dozen questions. They won't ask you yet for the formality of being a 501c3, and I'll get to that in a second. That's the federal side, but the state side now, like we said earlier, filling out forms, whether it's a tax form when you do your taxes at the end of the year or starting a corporation, is a little stack of paper, okay? And a bunch of questions. So you can have assistance. You can hire a lawyer that helps you fill this out. There are companies that for a fee will help you fill it out. But often I've walked some of the clients through that as a SCORE volunteer, and I'd be glad to. I can't do it for them, but I can help answer questions and show them that it's sometimes like doing a job application. They want to know certain things about you and personally here, they want to know about certain things about you and your business that you want to form. Okay, so that's the state side. Okay. The form may take you a couple of days just to gather all the pieces that you need. And that's if you're doing it yourself, and it's probably the same amount of time if you get a company to help you. Now, once you have that EIN number, the state approves what you've submitted, they give you that EIN number. You now need to be a tax deductible formal nonprofit organization, and you need to apply to the IRS. And they're the ones that issue the 501c3.
Oh yeah.
And they'll ask you for some, it's a little bit of a bigger lift in this case. I'll name a couple of things they'll ask you for. They'll ask you for articles of incorporation, and I'll define what that is in a second. They'll ask you for bylaws. They'll ask you for conflict of interest policy. They'll ask you for a projected initial budget. They'll ask you for your initial draft of who's on your board of directors. So those are the big pieces they're going to ask. Articles of incorporation are kind of why we're doing this business, what it's structured for. And I often, people get a little, wide-eyed, so to speak, and say, well, where do I start? Well, you can go online if you're into using AI now, ChatGPT, or if you're using even Google. You can Google, nonprofit articles of incorporation, and I have some links that I offer my clients that'll give you a sense of what they look like, what they sound like, for a different organization. But you can often take what you see and massage it and make it into your articles of incorporation. So the first thing is just understanding what it is, and then the second thing is how do I craft it, and so forth. So there are a lot of tools for free that you can see, and you also can talk to another nonprofit in the community. You knock on their door and say, "Hey, can I see your articles of incorporation?" They're not
I had that.
So it's not. It takes some thinking. You want to craft it so it really starts to put if you're if you use the analogy with building a building, it gives you some structure, some walls, how many floors, how many rooms, how many windows. That's what the articles of incorporation describe about your organization. The bylaws, now you have what you're going to be. The bylaws say how are you going to function. Are you going to have, how many people on your board of directors? Will you have a finance committee? Do you have a nominating committee? How many committees do you have? How often do you meet? What types of projects or what types of focus will you have? They're usually 3 or 4 pages. Again, the same approach to doing the bylaws as the articles of incorporation. You can find some samples. You can have, now I see what they're looking for, and you can help start to develop them. The conflict of interest policy is really that you don't want to have a board member who's going to benefit in any way financially or their own business from being on your board. So all of your board members and key volunteers sign a conflict of interest that I will recuse myself if there's any topic that I could see I have a conflict. Okay, and they sign that document because sadly you'll read in the newspaper or hear on the news occasionally that so and so has been arrested or is indicted for taking money from the organization they're helping, and there's nothing at the end of the day. An organization, the only thing they have is their name, their credibility. So you don't want to have that your name of your organization have it. So your conflict of interest policy protects you, against those types of things. And then they want a description of your board and what they're going to function, and that'll be contained in the bylaws, kind of their job description. So that's probably a little longer list, but those are the things, the hoops. There's one other piece. With the 501c3 organization that the IRS requires, you can do an EZ, like taxes have an EZ, form that you fill out.
Oh yeah.
Or you can do the full-blooded one. And the differences between EZ and the full form is the amount of money you think your budget's going to be. If you're $50,000 and less, you can fill out the EZ form. If you're $51,000 and more, you fill out the full-blooded form. So that helps sometimes. It's still a form to fill out, and you still need all those materials, but that's the lift. And again, there are companies that will help you, but then you need some dollars to pay those companies, initial dollars.
And most of the people that are coming to you for this help are not in a position to really pay the attorney fees and some of the others. So all of the help that you can give them, and you've been such a help to me with a client that we were trying to get. He wanted to get a 501c. He was doing a film festival in the state of Wisconsin here, and
Right.
I think he got it done because of your assistance and your help.
He
So
was
Lou,
pretty
you,
sharp guy, so yeah, but thank you.
yeah, yeah,
There's to start it off,
yeah,
people they have the passion. They do need some business experience, business background,
sure,
because
yeah,
the biggest
yeah,
hurdle is maybe the other difference in nonprofits and for-profits. For-profits, there's more of a transactional relationship with your customer. The customer in a nonprofit is called a donor, okay, but nonprofits have a service customer and a fundraising customer who's the donor. And
yeah,
sometimes they're the same person, but more often they're different people. The people or organization or foundations or business that are funding you are usually not the recipients of your service.
mhm,
So, and that's a distinction that they say, so how do I make money? Well, I'm going to get some grants. And say, oh,
yeah,
so I
yeah,
say to them, so tell me
yeah,
what your thinking is. How are you going to get grants? What are you thinking about? He says, well, I heard that, Harley Davidson is giving grants out. Well, that is true. They have a Harley Davidson Foundation, but what's going to make you special, or how are you going to get that grant? Because you could fill out a grant application as many, you've got a lot of competition with many other, nonprofits for that same dollar. What's going to raise your application to the top of the list, so that they're going to fund you? So
hmm,
a lot of times we spend in the coaching mentoring session, we talk about fundraising because there's a little phrase, no money, no mission. So and the mission of your organization is critical, but if you don't have money, it's the fuel, it's the gas for the gas tank of a nonprofit or any business, but we're not necessarily a transactional. We're not selling you an item and you're giving us money, whether
hmm,
it's a car or a bottle of water or whatever. I'm trying to sell you something. I give you a product, you give me money. That's a transactional relationship.
yeah,
We're more relational. We're more like the best analogy I can think of is life insurance. If I come to you and to buy life insurance, I walk out with a stack of paper, and the benefit is when I'm dead. So that I'm believing in helping those I love and care about. So I'm buying life insurance, and if I go to a broker, one broker or another broker, they're basically selling me the same product. But if I like the person, if I believe in this person, that they care about me and they're going to fit me with the right plan that I need, I'm going to go to them. So that's a relationship I've developed. So in non-for-profits, we develop relationships with donors that they see the mission, they see that what we do is what we say is what we do.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it really makes a big difference. But
hmm,
getting money is the biggest hurdle. After you got the 501c3 and after you did all the administrative stuff, it's all right. Now, how am I going to raise money? How much do I need, and how am I going to raise it?
yeah. Lou, let's talk a little bit about now that you've been mentoring, and you get besides people coming to you for help to start a nonprofit, they're also coming to you for help in other areas too. So, what do you see predominantly that they're asking for help in? What's their most challenging that you might that stand out on
Yeah, I
for
would say two things probably. Um, First is their business background of how do I set up how do I figure out who my customer is,
hmm,
and how do I set up
yeah,
pricing? Okay, how do I market what I'm going to do? And in customer development, there's kind of a path they teach us. There's acquisition of customers. There's upgrading of those customers, getting them to spend more for my business or donate more for my nonprofit. And then there's retention. Okay, how do I keep them? How do I keep them in the company? Continue to buy my product or support my nonprofit. And then I
hmm,
know there's a thing called attrition. I know I'm gonna lose certain customers. They move or they decided, I'm gonna volunteer someplace else or buy somebody else's stuff and so forth. So
sure,
their knowledge base of some of those fundamentals, okay. And then my father taught me a good thing, and it was pretty simple. He says, you can't spend what you don't got. Okay, and it wasn't the best English, but it was a good note, meaning
You
that
got the message across.
right. So if I need, if I have a $100,000 budget that I say I need, and that's not a lot in business, so if you have a salary of 50 or 60,000 and there's a 30% benefits on that, so that's another roughly $15,000. So that's 65, and then you have some, you have some space you rent and insurance you need to have, and internet services and reoccurring types of things. You just ate up the 100,000. So if I put I usually offer them advice for profit or not for profit. Let's develop a kind of a high level budget first. What do you think you're going to spend your money on? You're going to create a product that you're going to sell, so you need some development. You have to build your product or buy the raw ingredients or for example, I have a gentleman that's buying an existing laundromat. So he had fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs, he has rent that he has to pay, utilities he has to pay. Variable costs, how many machines does he need? What happens when they break down? Okay. Then he talks about his customers. All right, I have these existing expenses. They're going to happen whether I have a customer come in the store or not. So, how many customers do I need to break even? How many customers do I need to make, X profit or 10% or 20% or 100%? So I really need to do some research on the business I'm going to. So one of the things we have is what's called a business plan canvas. So you're looking externally at the marketplace. Who's your competition? What else is going on out there? What's this industry? Are laundromats in this example, they're going to continue to be used? Or every apartment or building or home have their own laundry? So it's not has a future. In that example, we think it does, but that's not what you're asking. So but staying to point, all these components we talk about, from marketing, budget costs, business planning, looking out a year to 2 years. I may be flat in the first year, but I may have a big curve where my income starts to really grow in year 2 and year 3.
Right.
That's what you go through with a client, and it can, saying this in 3 or 4 minutes, it can sound a little overwhelming. So you do it in chunks. You talk about different pieces. But you want the client to, if depending on their level of experience, I have a lot of clients that have owned a business or two. So some of the things I just talked about, when you do a discovery about the client, you say, okay, you got that, you know that. Let's talk about the areas you don't know, or you need some help, some fine tuning, kind of thing. So you kind of decide based on the client's background and knowledge where you're going to start, and what they really need. It's not all the things I'm saying usually. Okay.
Yeah, and I think something like a laundromat, they're going to have to understand that those machines are running probably more longer than the average wash machine in your home,
Right.
probably 24 hours a day. So you got maintenance costs that got to be factored into your pricing and the whole thing. And then surveillance cameras inside the laundromat. You're not going to be there 24/7. So
Right.
you want to be sure people aren't coming in damaging and doing.
Right.
So
Jim,
there's,
and you
yeah,
raise a good point, because there are businesses, some people say, I'm going to work this business 7 days a week or
right,
5 days a week, 10-hour days in the beginning. Some are passive businesses. So for that example of the laundromat, people really go into it as a passive business, that I don't have to be there, every day. I go there to,
yep,
and you don't even used to be, you collect the coins. Okay, you go in, you got all these quarters or whatever in the machines.
right,
Now, like many things, you come and you swipe your MasterCard or your Visa, and that's how you get or they're
right,
going into subscription services like car washes now. You pay $25 a month and you can have, every day you can get your car washed or five
yeah,
times, versus paying $8 or $9 every time you go there, kind of
right,
thing. So every business, it has some innovation, and that's another piece we talk about, is what's the future lie for this business type. So, and some are service businesses, some are merchandising businesses, some are nonprofit businesses. So it's really comprehensive, and having some background this last point, is having some background in business is really a step up. And sometimes I have a client that has a really great passion but lacks the experience. And I said, you may find it, they may not want to hear this, but you may find it beneficial to work in that line of work for a
Yes,
year
I
before
agree.
you jump in, feet first into the deep end to start the business. Learn from the inside out and then say, yeah, now I know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know when I started. Now I know what I didn't know, and I have some experience, and they're set up to be much more successful.
So true, because I get people that want to start a restaurant, and then I ask them, what do you know about running a restaurant? I say, well, they say I eat in them and I have good recipes, but they have no idea of what behind the scenes is. You got to order inventory, how long before you use that inventory, and
Right,
how much spoilage are you going to have in that restaurant, and how about managing employees that you're going to hire to wait tables, and
right,
all of these things that factor into running a restaurant. So
exactly.
you hit it right in the head. You better work for one and see firsthand what happens.
Yeah, how much food do I buy so it doesn't spoil? How much do I
Yeah,
need? All those types. There's
yeah.
another. My father, I guess, gave me more advice than I realized. He talked me about the five W's and H: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Okay, and if you
Somebody's
get
radio station. Yeah, who, what, why, where. Yeah,
yeah, well, it's a journalistic piece. You're absolutely right. That's what journalists use. But I found in business, why am I doing this? Why is this important? Why do people want my product? How do I position myself? How do I market it? What am I marketing? When should I do it? Is it seasonal? Is it 12
sure.
months a year? Are there heavy seasons and light seasons? The who, what, when, and then the who. Who's my customer? What's their profile? What do they
Yeah,
look like? Whether they're donors or customers, what's the demographics or where do they live? How often do they buy stuff? How can I paint the picture of that customer or customer, type customers plural. There's a lot of stuff about being in business versus being an employee of the business, but you'll learn a
right.
lot by working in the business, so that you can go out and be successful
Oh,
owning the
it's
business. Yeah.
absolutely. No, I that's the first thing I kind of suggest to people. I say, if you haven't really had any experience being in one, why don't you go work at one? You're doing it for the reason to gain knowledge. So
Right.
even if you're not making a lot of money, at least you're gaining that knowledge
Right.
and you're
Right.
seeing
I,
firsthand.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there's nothing like owning your own business, being your own boss, and you have a vision and an idea, and you want to see, hey, can I make it happen? And you work with others, you have mentors, you can even have a partner, but
right.
it's a thrill, it's exhilarating. You really could see it, and you make money, type of thing. So there's nothing like it. But sadly, if you look at the stats, there's a lot of startups that
Hmm.
don't stay startup for a long time. So that a high percentage of new businesses fail. So the
Yeah,
more knowledge, the more experience you get, and that's why I really love SCORE, because you and I are two examples of SCORE mentor volunteers, but we have in Southeast Wisconsin about 70 or 60 or
yeah,
70 of us, and we all have different, we have retired lawyers, bankers, marketing people,
yeah.
all different walks of life, finance people, accountants and so forth that can help. So you mentored.
There's about 10,000 nationally too.
That's exactly right. So wherever you
Yeah.
live, you're absolutely, there's a SCORE chapter near you. But and you mentioned something earlier that maybe we should say is that co-mentoring. So if I don't have a certain experience and another mentor does, that we
Hmm.
invite that other mentor if the client needs that expertise. So for example, I need somebody. Accounting is not my background. Now I understand it, but I had a client that had a dry cleaning business and needed an accountant to help them. How do I set it up? Whether it's
Yeah.
QuickBooks or, what should my ratios be and so forth. So I went and got a co-mentor to help
Hmm.
them, and I can sit on, and sometimes we don't have a lot of ego in it. If that other mentor is a better fit, I'll go help somebody else and we'll do a
Oh
trade.
yeah, yeah.
So somebody is not stuck with us if we're not really, meeting their needs, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that's the beauty of it. I was going to ask you, Lou, what is your, now that you've been mentoring for a while with SCORE, What is your take on SCORE and its mission? Yeah, and how do you think it fits into the equation of helping out people like?
I think it's been around for 50 years, and the reason that's a long time for a nonprofit because
Yeah,
SCORE is a not-for-profit
right.
501c3. I think it has great value, and I think it's lasted and continues because it's free, or low cost for some of our webinars
Sure.
and so
Yeah.
forth. But that our mission is to really help entrepreneurs be successful.
Oh,
And that's the vision is a world of businesses, and there's an interesting stat, and I'll probably mess it up, but I'll be close. But there's approximately, we were asked the question, how many businesses in the United States are considered small businesses? And I think a small business was defined less than 250 employees.
right.
Okay, and that the stat blew me away. It was something like 75 or 80% of the businesses. So we're helping the majority of people where they work, have their businesses be successful. We're helping those business owners. We're helping
Yeah.
new business leaders enter the arena. So SCORE is exceptionally valuable, and our partner is the Small Business Administration, SBA. That we work hand in hand because they're usually for profit. They're usually the people that provide low cost loans to get them started. So we really, our value. We probably could do a better job in marketing ourselves. Okay, because
Yeah.
the world doesn't
Yeah.
all know us that well,
Right.
but people find us. The SBA refers to us. Here in town, there's a group called WIBIC. They refer to us. So we have a lot of partners around
Yeah.
with chambers and many different groups that and banks refer their clients to us so they can get some of the fundamentals or some knowledge wherever they may be to help them
Yep.
be successful. So I'm sold. I'm going to be a volunteer for as long as I can, do it. So
Well, you are a treasure, Lou,
oh,
because your knowledge, you've got a tremendous knowledge, and the information you share, even in a short podcast like this, you've been just very, very helpful. Let me ask you, what do you see the future of SCORE? Do you see SCORE? We've gone through a kind of a trial year this year with the Doge and all the other things, because we're affected by those things too. Different administrations coming in, going. What do you see for the future of SCORE?
yeah, I think SCORE is going to be fine for the future. I think we're going to thrive. I think we're going to get stronger. I think we are going to take advantage of the digital platforms out there, like this type of podcast, to
Right.
get the word out. I think if we could do anything better than we've been doing is to do greater marketing of us, especially with the digital platforms that are available to us now. So whether it's
Right.
through LinkedIn or podcasts, or any type of thing to get to the person who's starting a new business, partnering with banks so that it's a win-win. The banks get a new customer for a loan, but we help their customer, know all the aspects of being successful. So we need to establish greater partnerships. We need to probably raise more money in those partnerships so that we're not totally dependent upon grants from, say, the federal government or others who has been our funder for 50 years.
Uh-huh.
But the federal government has been terrific because they care about small businesses.
Right.
And the SBA has been that partner that's been invaluable to that process.
Yeah, and I think the SCORE chapter is facing. This is one of the years where we're actually being looked harder on to raise our own funds. Each one of the chapters, like 400 chapters of SCORE across the country,
Right.
and each one of them got a little chunk of some funds from the SBA as to start the year. Now they're requesting that we go out and raise our own funds from the community. And just like you said, we don't get paid for the mentoring.
No.
There's no
No.
revenue stream coming in.
Right.
So we're finding other avenues like getting sponsors of this podcast, getting
Right.
sponsors for our programs that we put on webinars because we do educational programs too
Right.
as well. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a term in fundraising called the value exchange. It's basically another way of saying a win-win. So when we go to, a sponsor for the podcast, how is it good for you, sponsor? What benefit will you get? We know that we'll get funded and we could do another show. So we put together, not a ton of paper or a packet of, a dozen sheets of paper, but 1 page or 2 pages of paper that show the value exchange. We do our discovery. We know what does the sponsor want? And not every sponsor wants the same thing. So we do, a personalized look at whoever we're asking for money, what's the benefit going to be to them? And then we go meet them and we say, we think this is a benefit to you. What do you think? And hopefully they say yes, but if they say no, that's okay because they give us the information of what would be a benefit to them. So we can adjust ourselves to meet their needs. And that's the same thing as you in sales, as you get customers. How do you get your customer to want to buy your product? Well, what do they want to buy? There's a famous trainer named Zig Ziglar. He's passed now, but he was one of his disciples was a trainer in a class that I sat in, and they said, listen, if you're a storefront, and somebody comes in your store, they already told you I'm interested in your product, or else I wouldn't have walked through your doors, kind of thing. So, having a set of your eyes, really talking to your customers, communicating with cultivating your customers, keeping them to know what you're all about is and we need to do that, even to our clients, our mentees. We want them to refer other clients to us. So we need to do a good job with each client. So, and that's the same business. Yeah.
You mentioned Zig Ziglar. I remember the one phrase I remember so well by Zig. He said, "You can get anything in life that you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want."
You're absolutely right.
It's true. I've never forgot that. So
you really have to understand people and listen. And people say I talk a lot, and I do. But I do have bionic ears, so I listen.
You talk, but you make good points, and you pass on good information, Lou. So I like to hear you talk. So, hey, listen, we are speaking of talk. We're coming down the stretch today on this, and I just want to thank you so much for putting on the time to come on board with me today and share these. We're trying to showcase people like you that are mentors of SCORE, and you're just an ocean of knowledge. So people really see, hey, these are the people that are going to help us. So it's great.
You're gracious as could be. So thank you. It was a pleasure to be on here today.
Oh, it was. And I just want people to know that SCORE does not. We do not get involved monetarily with our clients. We don't take a percentage. We don't add. We don't let them buy us lunch. We don't want any kind of money transaction going on. We're here to help them, and that's it. So
there is. When we came on, I remember my onboarding process. We watched a bunch of videos, and I have to say they were well done. And one was about a code of ethics. And that we agreed to operate this way, and what you just described is exactly the way we operate. So, we can't be on their board of their business. We can, our exchange is exactly what we've been talking about in the podcast, but it's nothing else. And we prohibit ourselves from it. If we wish to ever do that, be on their board or work for them, we have to resign as a volunteer from SCORE. So we hold true to it that strongly.
Well, Lou, I just want to thank you so much. And I want to mention once again before we wrap up, our sponsor Veritas Financial Services has just joined us. And I want to ask people to go out there and visit Veritas, that's Veritas, investing.com, and you'll be able to go to their website. And what a tremendous company. I've been working with them for years, so I'm glad to be involved with them on this podcast. So
Jim, thank you once again. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Lou, and we will be working together because you've helped me tremendously with some co-mentoring, so I can't thank you enough for that. And thank you, folks, for tuning in to our podcast, and that's it for today. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the BizBuzz podcast. Tune in again for more information from SCORE of Southeast Wisconsin with mentor Jim Rossetti.